Hello everyone, this is Cabane the Christian. Today I'm going to talk about a subject that I've spoken on this YouTube channel before, but it's going to be a little more off the cuff today. This is about Isaiah 7. Isaiah 7 is obviously one of these classic messianic texts that gets brought up in debates between Jews and Messianic Jews or between Jews and Christians. And the reason for that is actually pretty simple. It's because it's one of the first prophecies that is cited as the New Testament begins. And so a lot of people looking for messianic prophecy of Jesus in the Old Testament, they immediately gravitate towards Isaiah 7. Now, in this video, I'm going to suggest that Isaiah 7 is a prophecy of Jesus, that it is only a prophecy of Jesus. I'm not going to take a double fulfillment route or anything like that. And that it is clearly a prophecy of the Messiah who, through intertextuality within the book of Isaiah, is given Jesus-like characteristics. So we come to realize that he is Jesus when at the actual time of his coming. But before doing any of this, we should really note that the role that Isaiah 7 plays in arguments between Jews and Christians is not really the role that it should play, because it's cited very few times in the New Testament. There are other passages of the Old Testament which provide a much fuller portrait of the Messiah. And so I don't think this should be the hinge on which the question turns. In other words, you shouldn't make your decision about whether Jesus is the Messiah of the Hebrew Bible or not based on what you think of Isaiah 7. That said, I do think Isaiah 7 provides strong evidence and argument for the messianic identity of Jesus. Now, the first challenge that we have to confront is the question of the context of Isaiah 7. Many Christians who cite Isaiah 7:14 don't know what the context is about, and because of that, they get skewered in any debate with somebody who does know what the context is about. Because it is argued, the context is about an event clearly in King Ahaz's day. It is not about the Messiah, and it could not be about the Messiah because it is so close to Ahaz's own time. Now, I'm going to argue otherwise. But in order to do this, we just have to walk through the text. Isaiah 7:1, in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, son of Uzziah, king of Judah. I want you to notice this. Ahaz's ancestry is pointed to right at the beginning of this passage. And then we go on. Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, the king of Israel, came up to Jerusalem to wage war against it, but could not yet mount an attack against it. So we have an alliance between the Syrians and the northern kingdom, the kingdom of Israel, which is larger and more powerful. Isaiah 7:2, when the house of David was told. So we have attention being called to the house of David in this very passage. And remember that the most basic characteristic for messianic identity is being the king, the son of David, the eschatological son of David who brings redemption to Israel and the nations. So Isaiah 7:2, when the house of David was told, Syria is in league with Ephraim, the heart of Ahaz and the heart of his people shook as the trees of the forest shake before the wind. Now, just as a side note here, I want you to remember that in the preceding chapter, the glory of Yahweh filled the temple, and that shook the foundations of the temple. So we know that God, the God of Israel, is incredibly powerful and transcendent, and yet we see Ahaz shaking when confronted with mere men. Isaiah 7:3, the Lord said to Isaiah, go out to meet Ahaz, you and Shear-Jashub, your son, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the washer's field. And say to him, be careful, be quiet, do not fear, and do not let your heart be faint because of these two smoldering stumps of firebrands, at the fierce anger of Rezin and Syria and the son of Remaliah. Now we should talk about the word stump here, because the same Hebrew word is not used in the preceding chapter, but the very same concept is indeed used. So here we have these two kings who are coming against the kingdom of Judah, and they are called smoldering stumps of firebrand. If we go right back to the preceding chapter, we see a vision of Isaiah being called to preach to Israel, but in fact we hear that the heart of Israel is going to get more dull, and they are going to get more blind. And then Isaiah asks, "What's this for? How long, O Lord?" And then God says, "Until cities lie without inhabitant, and houses without people, and the land is a desolate waste, and the Lord removes people far away." That is exile, and the forsaken places are many in the midst of the land, and though a tenth remains in it, it will be burned again, like a terebinth or an oak whose stump remains when it's felled. The holy seed is its stump. So here we see that God is sending Isaiah on a mission, and Isaiah's word is going to harden Israel further because they're so used to hearing the words of God that they are calloused. But the ultimate purpose of this Isaianic mission is to reduce Israel to a remnant, to a small particular remnant, and ultimately we have attention being called to the concept of the holy seed. We've talked in some of my other videos about the importance of the theme of the seed of the woman throughout the scriptures. God promises Eve a seed, and then we see the genealogy of that seed being traced through Genesis 5, 11, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then ultimately in Genesis 49 we are told that Jacob's son Judah is going to be the king who rules over the nations. And there are many connections in the Pentiuc between the king from the line of Judah who is prophesied and the seed that is prophesied in Genesis 3. Now I go into all of this detail just to say that we are inhabiting the same world that the rest of the Bible inhabits, and we are inhabiting the same narrative. And the connection between this question of the remnant, the holy seed, and Isaiah 7 is going to become clear in a few moments. Isaiah 7:5, because Syria with Ephraim, the son of Remaliah, has devised evil against you, saying, let us go up against Judah and terrify it, and let us conquer it for ourselves, and set up the son of Tabeel as the king in the midst of it. Now here's an important point. What is their purpose? Their purpose is to set up the son of Tabeel in the midst of it. 2 times already in this passage, attention has been called to the identity of Ahaz as a king in the line of the house of David. And of course, God had made an unbreakable covenant with David that his seed would reign forever. But here we see that they want to go into Jerusalem and set up another king who is not in the Davidic dynasty as king of Jerusalem. And if you know the scriptures, as Isaiah's original audience certainly would have, you are supposed to recognize the problem even at this early point in the passage. Isaiah 7:7, thus says the Lord God, it shall not stand, and it shall not come to pass. And I want you to just keep that language of something standing or falling in mind, because it's going to be important. And Isaiah 7:8, for the head of Syria is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin. So we have the capital of the kingdom in question, and then the capital of the capital, so to speak, is the person of the king, which again puts us within this framework and thought world about who the real king is. Is God going to be faithful to the dynasty of David, or is a new dynasty going to come and overthrow it and reign in Jerusalem? Then God goes on, within 65 years Ephraim will be broken to pieces, so that it will no longer be a people. Isaiah 7:9, and the head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is the son of Remaliah. There's the theme of kingship, sonship again. And if you are not firm in faith, you will not be firm at all. Now I want to make an important point here about the literary structure of Isaiah 7:8 to 9. This is what Alec Motyer points out. We have the head of Syria is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin, corresponding with, and the head of Ephraim is Syria, and the head of Samaria is the son of Remaliah. Now, by implication, 2 other things correspond here. What comes immediately after these passages? Within 65 years, Ephraim will be broken to pieces, so that it will no longer be a people, corresponds with, and if you are not firm in faith, you will not be firm at all. So there we see that by implication in this literary structure, the destruction of the kingdom of Israel, the northern kingdom, becomes a warning to the kingdom of Judah that if you are not firm in faith, you will not be firm at all. And this is going to be critical. Again, the Lord spoke to Ahaz, ask a sign of the Lord your God, let it be as deep as Sheol or as high as heaven. But Ahaz said, I will not ask, and I will not put the Lord to the test. Isaiah 7:13, and he said, hear then, O house of David, is it too little for you to weary men, that you weary my God also? Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Now I want to make a crucial point here, that the sign that is given here is a sign which confirms everything that the prophet had previously spoken. It does indeed confirm that within 65 years Ephraim will be broken to pieces, that it will no longer be a people, but it also confirms if you are not firm in faith, you will not be firm at all. And Ahaz responds to this by being not firm in faith. So, if we just are reading the text carefully, we should expect this prophecy to include both the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah in its prophecies of judgment. And I want to suggest that this is why the prophecy of Isaiah 7:14 is fulfilled so long in the future relative to its composition. But I will demonstrate that in more detail as we move forward. Remember also in Isaiah 7:13 we have again a prophecy to the house of David. I believe that's the third time that the house of David has been mentioned explicitly in this passage. And it again centers the text on the question of the Davidic dynasty. And then God says, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the Almah shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God is with us, or God with us. So I think it is significant right here that we have a prophecy of a birth coming right after God speaking to the house of David. The birth of this child is somehow and in some way a sign to the house of David. As for the question of the translation of Alma, I cannot go into an incredible amount of detail about this at this point. I'm not a Hebrew scholar, so I don't feel really qualified to go into a tremendous amount of detail at this point in time. However, what I will say is that Eugen Pentiuc, or Eugen Pentiuc, who is a scholar of Semitic languages, not just Hebrew, but of a wide variety of Near Eastern languages, has suggested, and he's following an ancient tradition here at Church of St. Jerome, that the word Alma is derived not from the Hebrew word for young, which would make it young woman, but rather from the Hebrew word for concealed or covered. And the reason that it has such a derivation is because the word carries the connotation of a woman who has been betrothed to marriage or is preparing to be married, and thus she wears the bridal veil over herself, but has not yet consummated the marriage. So the meaning of the word itself lexically is not itself virgin, it's rather a woman who is preparing to be married and hasn't yet consummated it, but because it carries the idea of the lack of consummation, the necessary implication is that the woman is a virgin. And this explains fairly neatly why, in fact, the Jewish translators of the Septuagint, who certainly knew Hebrew well, would choose the Greek word parthenos, meaning virgin. It's also notable that Matthew 1 and Luke both make the point that Mary was betrothed to Joseph, but the marriage was not consummated, because they were demonstrating the fullness of the fulfillment of this passage, which includes both the characteristics of betrothal and the characteristics that it was not yet consummated. However, within the context of Isaiah 7, 13 to 14, we get another indication that this birth must be miraculous in some manner or in some way. Let me just get the passage up. This is in Judges chapter 13. The book of Judges is one of the less read books of the Bible, I suppose, but it's a very important book because the other prophets make frequent allusion to the historical narratives that are given in the book of Judges, and also the Hebrew canon, the Tanakh, considers these historical books to be part of the prophets because they are prophetic in character to Israel, and they were written by prophets. Now, what does Isaiah 7 14 quote or allude to? Here it is. This is when the angel of the Lord comes to the wife of Manoah, and they are the parents of Samson, who is consecrated to God as a Nazirite. And in Judges 13:7, she quotes the angel, "But he said to me, Behold, you shall conceive and bear a son." Now, this might not seem like much to you at first, but in fact, this phrase only appears 3 places in the Bible. It appears, I believe, in the narrative of Rebekah and Isaac. It appears in Judges 13, and it appears in Isaiah 7. And the important thing here is that the birth in Judges 13 is miraculous. It is God bringing forth life in a barren woman. He brings forth life out of death. And the birth is miraculous. And if Isaiah is in fact alluding to Judges 13, this explains why it is described as a sign, which has to be distinct in some way. Is there any other evidence that we can give for the allusion to Judges 13? Because someone might well argue, well, why not just say it is an allusion to Genesis? Well, great question. There is in fact evidence for this. And the evidence is that in the very near context, we have other allusions to the book of Judges. First and most relevant is Isaiah 9, which is a prophecy of the child who has been born, who will sit on the throne of David, who will reign on his kingdom, which will increase forever. And Judges 9 makes allusion to, Isaiah 9 makes allusion to Judges, especially Judges 4 to 5 and following. Isaiah 9:1, but there will be no gloom for her who is in anguish. In the former time he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, but in the latter time he made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. Now there are a few allusions here. First, the references to Zebulun and Naphtali look back to what Sisera did to these tribal lands in Judges 4 to 5. The victory was won by Deborah, aided by Barak. The phrase Galilee of the nations is very close to what is spoken in Judges 4:2. And let me just get this passage up so I can give you the exact phrasing. Judges 4:2. Well, it just transliterates it, but it's Harosheth Hagoyim, and this is of the nations. Moreover, we have the description of the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. This is theologically important for the book of Judges, because who is it who wins the victory over Sisera? It is Barak, whose name means lightning. And in the Song of Deborah, which commemorates this victory, Deborah describes Israel being like the sun, which rises in its strength, ending the night. The climactic judge of the book of Judges is Samson, who is a king like the sun rising. An allusion is made to Samson in Psalm 19, the mighty man who comes out from his tent to enlighten the world. And there are a number of other allusions to Judges 13 as well. One of the most interesting is in Isaiah 9:6, where we hear, for to us a child is born, to us a son is given, the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Father forever, and Prince of Peace. Now I want you to pay attention to this phrase, his name shall be called Wonderful, or his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, because this specifically refers to Judges 13:18. Now in Judges 13, Manoah has heard the voice of the angel of Yahweh, which gives him a prophecy. And in 13:17, after offering an ascension offering, Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, "What is your name? So that when your words come true, we may honor you." And the angel of Yahweh said to him, "Why do you ask my name, seeing it is wonderful?" So the same kinds of things are going on here, and we have a very specific allusion to the name being wonderful. It manifests the inner character of the person in question. And this is why in the Septuagint, which is an interpreted translation, it doesn't always take a literal view, but the Jewish translators interpret the text for their Gentile audience. The Septuagint in Isaiah 9 calls the child the angel of great counsel. That's because they understand that this is a reference back to Judges 13, and that we have both the son who was born, which refers back to Samson, and the angel who announces the birth being combined in one person here. I should have also mentioned Isaiah 9:4. For the yoke of his burden, the staff of his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. The phrase "as on the day of Midian" refers to Gideon's victory over the Midianites in Judges 6 to 8. So this is why we know that Isaiah 7:14 is specifically an allusion to Judges 13, the birth announcement of Samson, which is miraculous in character, which gives us pretty strong evidence that the sign in Isaiah 7 is at least some kind of miraculous birth. Now we can move forward in the text of Isaiah. Isaiah 7:15, he shall eat curds and honey when he knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good. Okay, this passage has caused a lot of problems for many people who say, well, if this is about Jesus, how could there ever have been a time when he did not know how to refuse the evil and to choose the good? The answer to this is not referring merely to the faculty of ethical knowledge. It is rather referring to enthronement. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil is about enthronement, and we see this language over and over again in the Psalms, or Proverbs, the wisdom to have discernment. In Genesis, the Joseph story, Pharaoh seeks for a wise and discerning man, and he brings Joseph to Egypt. Most clearly, we have in 1 Kings 3, Solomon prays for the wisdom to discern between good and evil. What this means is that the king sitting on his throne has the wisdom and has the sense to discern what is the good choice and what is the evil choice. And what is the good judgment? What is the bad judgment? Who is righteous? Who is guilty? So, if the references to the house of David weren't already enough, here the language of enthronement itself is used, because the boy shall have the knowledge to discern between good and evil. What does it mean when it says, before the boy knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good? The land whose two kings you dread will be deserted. Well, this means the boy isn't old enough to redeem and reunite the northern kingdom. But before he does, or rather to the kingdom of Judah, but even before the boy comes and before he is enthroned and has this redemptive capacity, these kingdoms which have attacked Judah will be destroyed. The phrase curds and honey is massively important, because this is the definitive proof that Isaiah 7:14 does not refer to a time within the prophet's own lifetime. We hear that before the boy is enthroned, he will be eating curds and honey. And then that phrase curds and honey is used one other time in this passage, Isaiah 7:21. In that day a man will keep alive a young cow and 2 sheep, because of the abundance of milk that they give. He will eat curds, for everyone who is left in the land shall eat curds and honey. Well, what day is that? We just have to go back to Isaiah 7:17, which follows the prophecy that the northern kingdom in Syria will be destroyed and deserted. Isaiah 7:17, the Lord will bring upon you and upon your people and upon your father's house such days as have not come since the day that Ephraim departed from Judah, the king of Assyria. Remember when I said that the sign of Isaiah 7 gives confirmation to both of the prophecies. Within 65 years, Ephraim will be broken so that it will no longer be a people, and if you are not firm in faith, you will not be firm at all. Ahaz's lack of faith made that the prophecy to become true. Thus, rather than the destruction of the northern kingdom and Syria being a sign that Judah has been saved, it is in fact a sign that the same armies are coming to attack Judah as well. Assyria destroyed those kingdoms, and now it is a sign that Assyria is going to take on Judah. Isaiah 7:18, in that day the Lord will whistle for the fly that is at the end of the streams of Egypt, and for the bee that is in the land of Assyria. And they will all come and settle in the steep ravines, and in the clefts of the rocks, and on all the thorn bushes, and on all the pastures. So here we hear about thorns again. Thorns play an important role in the literary structure of the book of Isaiah. It also calls us back to Genesis 3, where the curse of Adam's exile is associated with the growing of thorns. So just as Adam's exile is associated with thorns, so also is Judah's exile associated with thorns. Moving on to verse 20. In that day the Lord will shave with a razor that is hired beyond the river, with the king of Assyria, the head and the hair of the feet, and it will sweep away the beard also. This language of Judah being described as a body goes back to Isaiah 1, where we're told that the whole body is sick, from the crown of the head to the sole of the foot. And it actually looks forward to the time when the servant who takes on Israel's election in Isaiah 53 is healed, and thereby heals the whole body. But this is why the attack on Judah is described as the king of Assyria shaving the hair of this man who represents Judah. 7:21 and 22, which we've read, "In that day a man will keep alive a young cow and 2 sheep, and because of the abundance of milk that they give, he will eat curds, for everyone who is left in the land will eat curds and honey." Well, this sounds like a good thing, doesn't it? The reason that the language is used in this way can be seen by looking at Jeremiah, because in Jeremiah, in some sense, the exile of Judah, which is focused on the higher classes of the Judahites, is actually good news for those poor who live in Jerusalem, because they were being oppressed by the nobility of Judah. So that's why there is a positive side to this. Another reason that we are told about bees and honey goes back to Exodus 23, where we are told that before Israel comes into Canaan, God is going to send huge swarms of bees into Canaan to drive out many of the people. And those bees, of course, leave behind honey, which is why when Israel comes into the land, it is flowing with milk and honey. So we have this language describing the old Exodus and conquest, and here we see Judah is going to be conquered just as she once conquered the land. Isaiah 7:23, "In that day every place where there used to be 1,000 vines worth 1,000 shekels of silver will become briars and thorns. With bow and arrows a man will come there, for all the land will be briars and thorns. And as for all the hills that used to be hoed with the hoe, you will not come there for fear of briars and thorns, but they will become a place where cattle are let loose and where sheep tread." So we have the phrase briars and thorns being repeated over and over again. This is used elsewhere in Isaiah 55, the end of Isaiah 55, we hear that there's going to be no more thorns and briars, but rather cypresses and myrtles. And of course, Isaiah 55 immediately follows upon Isaiah 53 and 54. The work of the servant is that which undoes the coming of briars and thorns, which represents the exile of Judah. Moving forward, Isaiah 8. Isaiah 8:1, "Then the Lord said to me, Take a large tablet, and write on it common characters, belonging to Maher Shalal Hashbaz." What does this mean? This means speed, spoil, haste, booty. The name of the child represents what is going to happen to the kingdom of Judah. Assyria is going to come through with speed, it's going to take spoil, speed and haste, and it's going to take booty. And I'll just move forward before answering this particular objection. Isaiah 8:2, "I will get reliable witnesses, Uriah the priest, Zechariah the son of Jeberechiah, to attest for me." Isaiah 8:3, "I went to the prophetess, she conceived and bore a son. Then the Lord said to me, Call his name Speed, Spoil, Haste, Booty. For before the boy knows how to cry, my father or my mother, the wealth of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria will be carried away before the king of Assyria." Now, many people, rightly noting the literary likenesses between Isaiah 8:1-3 and Isaiah 7:14, for example, the conception of a son, the announcement, the boy has been conceived, a name which is given to the son, and then the son, before the son comes to a particular age, in one case it's knowing good and evil, here it's how to cry my father and my mother, something is going to happen. The reason that this cannot be the same child is because this is actually a pun on Isaiah 7:14. This is not the opposite of Isaiah 7:14, or pardon me, I'm sorry, I'm a little tired. This is the opposite of Isaiah 7:14, but the connection is intentional, because in Isaiah 7:14 the boy's name is God is with us. It is a sign of redemption, and here the name of the boy is Speed, Spoil, Haste, Booty. And it looks back to what was said in the entirety of Isaiah 7, which is that the destruction of the northern kingdom and the kingdom of Syria is not a sign of Judah's immediate salvation, but a sign of Judah's judgment. So again, here we have the reference to the destruction of Syria and the northern kingdom, Damascus and Samaria. Confirming this interpretation is what comes immediately afterwards. The Lord spoke to me again, because this people have refused the waters of Shiloh that flow gently and rejoice over Rezin and the son of Remaliah. In other words, they don't have faith in the Davidic promise. Therefore, behold, the Lord is bringing up against them the waters of the river, mighty and many, the king of Assyria and all his glory, and it will rise over all its channels and over your banks, and it will sweep on into Judah. So the northern kingdom obviously didn't have faith in the Davidic promises because they installed a separate dynasty and warred against the house of David. But what God is saying here is that the flood which comes into them is going to sweep into Judah as well. In other words, as I've said, the destruction of Samaria and Damascus is a sign of Judah's immediate judgment, not its immediate salvation. And it will sweep on into Judah. It will overflow and pass on, reaching even to the neck, and its outspread wings will fill the breadth of your land, O Emmanuel. The reference to Emmanuel here confirms most mundanely that we are still in the same world, but it also shows that Emmanuel is the heir of the land. Emmanuel is the one to whom the land belongs, which makes sense given my argument that this is about the Davidic seed, who is the particular holy seed predicted in Isaiah 6. So Emmanuel is the heir of the land, which is why he has the capacity to know good and evil, because he's the ruler. And then Isaiah 8:9, be broken, you peoples, be shattered. Give ear, all you far countries. Strap on your armor and be shattered. Strap on your armor and be shattered. Take counsel together, but it will come to nothing. Speak a word, but it will not stand, for God is with us. Clearly, the God is with us here connects to Emmanuel, and here God is with us is a sign that after Judah is judged, after the flood sweeps on into Judah, there is going to be a redemption, and the word and counsel of the enemy peoples will not stand. This, I believe, within the literary structure of Isaiah, is one of the strongest arguments that the prophecy of Emmanuel is not immediately filled within the days of King Ahaz. And the way that we understand this is by looking at Isaiah 8:10 and comparing it with Isaiah 40 and Isaiah 46. Isaiah 8:10, take counsel together, it will come to nothing. Speak a word, it will not stand, for God is with us. Then we have Isaiah 40, 8-9. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever. So the word of the nations will not stand in Isaiah 8:10, but this is picked up in Isaiah 40 and says the word of our God will stand forever. Clearly these texts are connected because Isaiah 8:10 describes the salvation of Judah. It describes the salvation of Judah by connecting it with Emmanuel. The word of the nations will not stand. Why? Because the word of God does stand. And consider how Isaiah 40 goes on. Get you up to a high mountain, O Zion, herald of good news. Lift up your voice with strength, O Jerusalem, herald of good news. Lift it up. Fear not. Say to the cities of Judah, behold your God. Now this is incredible because Emmanuel is God with us. And many people have just said, well, it's just a sign that God is with them. There's no connotation of any kind of incarnation or visible revelation of God here. But we see here that the very text in Isaiah which actually alludes to the prophecy of Emmanuel connects it to the visible revelation of the God of Israel. Behold your God. The other part of Isaiah 8:10 is also alluded to in this section. Isaiah 8:10 says, take counsel together, but it will not stand. And Isaiah 46, 8-10 alludes to this as well. Remember this and stand firm. Recall it to mind, you transgressors. Remember the former things of old, for I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from the ancient times things not done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will accomplish all my purpose. Isaiah 40 and Isaiah 46 therefore describes the means by which the counsel and word of the nations will not stand. If we want to understand in more detail the prophecy of Emmanuel, we must turn to this section of Scripture. And as we look here, I also want to make a point about the nature of Isaianic prophecy. Because some, reading Isaiah 7-8, have suggested that the predicted deliverance here in Isaiah is not deliverance ultimately from Babylon or from a future exile, but it does not even describe the exile of Judah. Rather, what it describes is the invasion of Assyria into Judah, which is finally undone. And in order to answer this objection, we have to understand Isaiah 40 to 55. Many people looking at Isaiah 40 to 55 have said, well, this is all about the Babylonian exile. But in fact, it is not. And by understanding Isaiah 40 to 55, we can understand the chronological framework within which the rest of the book works. And thus, when we hear a prophecy of the invasion of Assyria into Judah, we understand that the ultimate fulfillment of Judah's redemption must come later, after the Babylonian exile. So we have three sections in Isaiah 40 to 55. You've got Isaiah 41 to 53. Isaiah 40 and Isaiah 55 correspond because they're the beginning and end, but the central sections are Isaiah 41 to 43, and this is about Sennacherib. This is about Sennacherib's invasion to Judah. The way we understand this is actually relatively simple. It's because the way that Isaiah 43 ends. Isaiah 43, 27 to 28. Your first father sinned, and your mediators transgressed against me. Therefore I will profane the princes of the sanctuary, and deliver Jacob to utter destruction, and Israel to reviling. So, what we see here is that there is a future prophecy of the destruction of Judah. There is a future prophecy of the sanctuary being profaned. This is something which comes after what has been described in Isaiah 41 to 43. And Cyrus is not named in Isaiah 41 to 43. We don't hear of his name. What's being described is a redemption from a particular oppression. I know this sounds complicated, but I have articles on it if you want to look at it in more detail there, and it really does work out. The way to understand how this works is to look at the introduction to Isaiah 40 to 55, which comes in Isaiah 36 to Isaiah 39. The text begins with the with the invasion of the kingdom of Judah by Sennacherib, who comes up against the city, comes up against Jerusalem, and then he is driven back. He's driven back because during the night, the angel of the Lord goes through his camp and destroys 185,000 of his men. This is an allusion to Passover. During the night, the angel of the Lord, the angel of death, goes into a foreign people and it slaughters many of their sons. Understanding that it is an allusion to the Exodus sheds yet more light on how Isaiah 40 to 55 describes all of those things therein in light of the Exodus. Isaiah 41 to 43 is a description of the invasion of the Assyrian army, and then God delivers Judah with an exodus. But then Judah is unfaithful in light of what God has done for them. And in fact, in 41 to 43, there are three cycles where we have the problem, we have the deliverance, but then Israel is unfaithful in light of that deliverance. Then Hezekiah is described as sick. He prays to God, and then 15 years, he's given an additional 15 years, and the miracle is that the sun turns back 10 degrees. The meaning of this sign is that Judah's exile is still coming. Hezekiah has been granted an extension of life, but not eternal life. The sun has moved back 10 degrees, but it's still coming down. The night of exile is still on its way. And that interprets the deliverance from Sennacherib, because we're being told, even though Judah was delivered from Sennacherib, exile is still coming. And the reason for the coming exile is described in Isaiah 39, where Hezekiah becomes arrogant and he shows off his wealth to the king of Babylon. And of course, the Babylonians are going to come in. And so, Isaiah 41 to 43 is followed by the section corresponding to this, Isaiah 44 to 48, which describes the invasion of and the deliverance from the Babylonians. In Isaiah 44 to 48, there are three cycles. There's one cycle, and the cycle ends with Israel's unfaithfulness in light of the exodus God has wrought for them from Babylon. It's important to note that Isaiah 41 to 43 describes Israel worshiping idols, but Isaiah 44 to 48 does not. In fact, it says, Israel confesses the name of the Lord, but not in truth or right, which is exactly the sins that Jesus prosecutes Israel for. That they confess the name of the Lord. It's not crude, open idolatry, but their heart is not in it. Isaiah 48 moves forward, and it asks, let me see if I can find the exact pages, or I'm sorry, the exact passages. There we go. Isaiah 48:6. It says, "You have heard, now see all this." That is the deliverance that God has worked for them from Babylon. And the prophet says, "Will you not declare it?" Now this starts a thread in Isaiah which ends with Isaiah 66, where the remnant of Israel is finally redeemed, and they are sent out, and they declare God's glory to the nations. And Isaiah 48 ends sadly with, "There is no peace for the wicked." In other words, despite Israel's deliverance from Babylon, they still were not faithful in light of it, and thus they are judged again. This is the way to understand the relationship of these texts prophesying deliverance from Assyria earlier in the book, because what we see is that the promise keeps getting delayed, of course in God's providence, but the promise keeps getting delayed because Israel and Judah keep being unfaithful. In Isaiah 41 to 43, God gave them an exodus from Sennacherib, but they continued to worship idols. There are 3 cycles describing that. In Isaiah 44 to 48, God brought them an exodus, a redemption from Babylon, but their heart still was not with it. And then in Isaiah 49 to 54, you have 3 cycles where the servant is faithful, even though he is suffering and being persecuted. And this answers the triple unfaithfulness of Isaiah 41 to 43. God brought a deliverance for Judah, but they were unfaithful. And in Isaiah 49 to 54, the servant wasn't yet delivered. He was suffering, but he was still faithful. And that answers the problem. Thus, Israel is finally faithful, so the promises come through in Isaiah 54 to 55. And that is the removal of briars and thorns, which is exactly what we've been seeing in Isaiah 7 to 8. I spent a lot of time on that because this is the chronological context within which we can understand Emmanuel. I spent time on it because the prophecy of Emmanuel makes explicit allusion to Isaiah 40 and 46, and thus it places the time of deliverance at the time of Isaiah 54 to 55, and by implication, the time of Isaiah 53. Now, there are just a couple more things that I want to point out to you. Isaiah 8:11, "Thus the Lord spoke to me with a strong hand upon me, and warned me not to walk in the way of this people, saying, Do not call conspiracy what all this people calls conspiracy. Do not fear what they fear, nor be in dread. But the Lord of hosts, him shall you regard as holy. Let him be your fear, and let him be your dread. And he will become a sanctuary and a stone of offense and a rock of stumbling to both houses of Israel, and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem." And here again we have this concept of the presence of the Lord being the means by which Israel and Judah are whittled down to a remnant. "And many shall stumble on it. They shall fall and be broken." Remember what was earlier said about the other nations? "Be broken, you peoples." Here, these unfaithful Israelites who stumble on the Lord are regarded as just as wicked as those nations which were attacking the kingdom of Judah in the first place. So they are judged as well. "They shall fall and be broken, and shall be snared and be taken. Bind up the testimony, seal the teaching among my disciples. I will wait for the Lord," this is of course Isaiah speaking, "who is hiding his face from the house of Jacob, and I will hope in him." And thus, the great prophecy reaches its final point. And remember, we are told that Isaiah seals up the teaching, and he waits for the Lord. This would make no sense if, in fact, the promise of Emmanuel was meant to be fulfilled within his lifetime. He binds it up, he seals it, and he says, "I will wait for the Lord," because, by implication, This promise is not going to be fulfilled in a long time because Ahaz and Judah with him have been unfaithful. The Lord was hiding himself from the house of Jacob. And this echoes an earlier passage in Isaiah, which is Isaiah 2, 1-5, which speaks of the nations coming to Mount Zion and worshiping the Lord, learning from his ways. And then the prophet says, O house of Jacob, come, let us walk in the light of the Lord. He's not hiding anymore. He has openly proclaimed himself. His mountain is lifted up. The nations flow towards to worship him. And the connection of Isaiah 8 with Isaiah 2 is again established by what comes immediately afterwards in Isaiah 8. Behold, I and the children whom the Lord has given me are signs and portents in Israel from the Lord of hosts who dwells on Mount Zion. So there you've got the connection between Mount Zion here and Mount Zion in Isaiah 2. Now I know this was kind of all over the place, but here are some takeaways I want you to get from this. First, Messianic prophecy is not something you are going to get on your first time through the Bible. It is complicated. It is difficult. Don't expect to use a list of Messianic prophecies and get away with it if you're debating with anybody who's informed, because that's not the way the New Testament uses the Hebrew Scriptures. It's not the way we should use the Hebrew Scriptures either. Second, however, there is a logic to interpreting Messianic prophecy. It is not arbitrary. We can work things out from within the structure of the Hebrew Bible itself that are marvelously congruent with what the New Testament says about Jesus the Messiah. Third, in order to work these things out, we have to pay close attention to the literary structures of the Pentiuc and the prophets. We have to pay attention to the way texts are structured, because understanding the literary correspondences within the texts illumines both sides of that correspondence. And we also have to understand allusion. That's A-L-L-U-S-I-O-N, not illusion. Allusion, when a text makes reference to an earlier text or to an earlier part in the text being read itself. Understanding allusions and echoes of Scripture enables us to link up subjects which we would not otherwise link up in the intention of the prophet. And by so linking them up, we illumine everything which contributes to this marvelous fabric which points to Jesus the Messiah. And fourth, we can have confidence that Jesus is the Messiah of Israel, that he is the Messiah of the Hebrew Scriptures, because what I've gone to describe for you today is not just something that you find in this text. It is something that you find throughout the whole Bible. This method is profoundly fruitful. So just to review the logic for the Isaiah argument itself, the logic is basically this. Isaiah 7 begins and has its central focus the enduring nature of the house of David. The house of David is mentioned explicitly at least 3 times. The non-Davidic ancestry of the other kings in question are pointed to, and we're told that the project of the northern kingdom and Syria was to set up the son of Tabeel, not the son of David, in Jerusalem. So the whole thing comes within the context of the house of David. So the prophecy of the birth is given in that context. In other words, the prophecy of the birth is meant to confirm God's fidelity to the house of David. Third, the structure of the text teaches us that the prophecy would not be fulfilled within Ahaz's lifetime, because the sign of Emmanuel is not only the sign that there will be redemption for Israel and Judah, it is the sign that there will be redemption after both of them are judged, because Ahaz was not firm in faith, thus he will not be firm at all. So we're told that the judgment of the kingdoms which were attacking Judah are signs not of immediate redemption, but of further judgment, that the floodwaters of Assyria will sweep on into Judah, and that they'll be judged as well. We also understand by looking at the correspondences in the literary style of Isaiah 7 to Judges 13 and to Isaiah 9 that the nature of the birth in question and the nature of the sign is miraculous, because the phrase quotes directly Judges 13, where the birth is birth from a barren woman. Moreover, we have correspondences between Isaiah 7 to 8 and Isaiah 40 to 46, which sets this prophecy in the chronological context of an exile which comes after the Assyrian and Babylonian exiles, which in fact is taught in Isaiah 7 itself when it says, when the boy becomes king, the people will be eating curds and honey, which is only something, according to the text, which happens after the exile. And finally, Isaiah concludes the prophecy by commending his people to wait for the Lord, and by sealing up the prophecy. And that language of sealing is used, for example, in Daniel to seal prophecies that will not be fulfilled for a long time. So I know it was jumbled, but I still hope you got something out of it if you've listened to the end.